which does not produce, well, certainly in any large measure. We're takers of the price, we import oil, and therefore our country's economy, and it seems, Mr. Speaker, in some quarters of this country, and perhaps on the other side, that economic success and economic development and economic prowess is a bad word. And let me state for the record that no society, no country can thrive and provide for its people, can attract foreign investment, which is not a bad word, cannot ensure sustainability, cannot pay for roads and schools and hospitals, and pay for those amongst us who are vulnerable without an economy that can provide for those areas. It does not take talk and pretty talk and well wishes. It needs sound economic prudence. And therefore the idea that economic success and economic development and economic growth is not necessarily a thing that we need to have as a strong society should be put to bed as the wrong thing. But equally and importantly, notwithstanding the importance of ensuring that we have a safe physical environment and a clean environment, notwithstanding the importance of ensuring that we have significant foreign exchange earnings as a nation, but thirdly and importantly is really the competitiveness of our jurisdiction. That is important for many reasons. Why? And it was referred to by many of the speakers today. When you look at different jurisdictions around the world, particularly as you want to create a manufacturing sector that can not only supply your domestic needs, but can be a major exporter of goods, particularly goods, but of course services, but particularly goods. That competitiveness needs to be underscored by an energy framework and system that allows for you to produce the goods in a very competitive way, a robust way, in an efficient way, based on a low cost of energy. And when you look around the world, the countries that continue to be on the forefront of significant smart manufacturing, and two, manufacturing that leads to high levels of export, and three, those high exports leading to significant levels of foreign exchange and large GDPs, they're all underscored by energy frameworks and sectors that are of low cost. Whether we talk about China, Singapore, South Korea, Trinidad right next door. All of them, bar none, have significant sectors of energy that have low cost. And therefore, as we talk about the future of Barbados, there's a temptation by many people who come to public life to drive forward looking into the rearview mirror. And that, in my view, leads to what can only be described as reckless driving. And when you talk about the future of Barbados, it requires all of us who come to public life to ensure that as we look to what the future must be, we mustn't only contemplate the now, today's reality. We have to look and ask ourselves, what do we want our jurisdiction to look like? Not just for foreign investors, no. For our domestic citizens and residents, for those born and unborn. And therefore now is the time that as you look towards not just 2030, but 2035, of course, the 5-year change had to come as a result of COVID. But as you look to 2035 and beyond, ask yourself, what does Barbados need to become a competitive jurisdiction that can produce goods and services for domestic consumption at a reasonable cost, can produce goods and services that can be exported, not just across CARICOM, but around the world at a competitive cost, particularly given that we have a strong currency, which therefore makes naturally our exports a lot more expensive. So we have to find ways with a mix of technology and energy and innovation to ensure that the baseline has a mix that allows for competitiveness. But beyond the competitive measure, ensuring that our people can have a quality of life that we've hitherto enjoyed since 1966, post-independence, and moving on. Because why? The world continues to change. The world owes Barbados nothing, Mr. President. And as legislators, we have to ensure that we look ahead to prepare our people for that competitive reality. And therefore, with respect to the fourth limb, resilience. You see constantly external shocks coming to our country, coming to our region, when you think that you've turned the corner, finally, and you're walking down the road we go, an external shock comes. We came to office in 2018 when we had to stabilize the country after 23 downgrades under the last administration. And we've been able to save the dollar, we've been able to stabilize the economy, and we've been able to grow. But you remember, Mr. President, in 2020, we were confronted, and then the world was confronted, with not the 2008 financial crisis, which of course was significant, but nowhere near as negatively impactful as the COVID-19 pandemic. And we had to confront that as a nation. But out of that, as they say, you should never waste a good crisis. And out of the 2021 experience of COVID, the government of Barbados took a bold decision that we will use the crisis to further reposition. I note the word further, because of course after 2018, the country was in that mode of resilience building. But it took a further decision of further repositioning ourselves as a resilient jurisdiction. And we did all that once under an IMF program. And when we talk about energy, in the bounds of COVID and recovery of COVID, we're still able to have electric buses on our road after not having buses being purchased for 10 years. And I hope, Mr. President, that my new senatorial colleague is listening and can be reminded of that fact, that when there was that lost decade, no buses were bought. None. And that's unfortunate, but notwithstanding the difficulties that we had to confront, the government took a bold decision that as Barbados is saying, here we are, looking down the road as to where we have to go in 2035 and beyond, we are still going to put our mouth where our money is. And this is not to appease any international anybody. We as a country, a new republic, have determined for ourselves that for us to go forward as a powerful nation state, that we have to determine what our interests are. And energy efficiency and energy independence must be part and parcel of that new republic, not just today, not just in 10 years' time, but going forward. So as you move to that mode of 100% renewable energy, as it were, the magic line, as it were, whether oil goes up or down, broadly, we must be in a place where we can be competitive to export our goods and services, provide quality and cost-efficient energy to our people, and to ensure that the country has the ability to weather any storm, irrespective of any external shock going forward. And that has to be part and parcel of the legislators' remit, as it were, of Barbados. Now, I want to very briefly look and place this debate a bit further within the context of the Barbados Investment Plan, which of course, in terms of its title, and I'm prepared to make this a document of the House, Mr. President, Barbados 2035, a plan for investment in prosperity, and the operative word here that I love so much, and resilience. And I want to focus very briefly on the investment priority number 8, which focuses on a fully renewable and energy independent island. And in this context, of course, we're talking about Barbados. And it speaks to, Mr. President, the first limb, power, focusing on a mix of solar and wind and hydrogen and gas and storage so as to meet domestic power needs. That's the first aspect. The second one, industry, which I've touched on, manufacturing, competitiveness, the business sector, as it were, electrify industrial processes for decarbonization. Now, why is that decarbonization important? Because even when you look at the shipping sector, shipping, of course, is a major plank of international trade. Domestically, of course, manufacturing, as I said, is needed to help to produce the goods that we need for domestic consumption and exporting. But as you grow part of the problem that we've had over the years, and this was a major issue in the World Trade Organization, is that the world was confronted with the problem of, as you grew economies, as you grew your production, you were using those fossil fuels that caused the problem that we're now facing in terms of the environment. So therefore, how do you decarbonize your processes that you grow, but you grow in a way that doesn't harm your environment? So it causes, therefore, for us now to relook. And it takes investment, because it just can't take political will. You need financing to do so. So while some people may scoff at the idea of financing and foreign direct investment, small states have limited options. And whilst Barbados is en route and pursuit to become a powerful, wealthy nation in the future, that transition requires for us to do a number of things in the interest of the long term. Mr. President, Singapore, as we know today, did not reach where they are today by talk. They reached it by a vision underscored by Lee Kuan Yew. He made sure that his domestic policies were in line with the international realities, but notwithstanding the rough seas that he had to go through and the country, he made sure that the country went through with temerity and focus. Same thing with Germany, the largest economy in the European Union. Same thing with Norway. The point I'm making is that it requires for us to dig deep. And we have to, and I think this was mentioned by a number of speakers today, the energy transition that we are undertaking in this country will require of us to continually have a level of public engagement with our people. Because why? When societies transition, you're not talking about transition from a course of behavior that happened 2 years ago to now. We're talking about over the last 200-300 years, particularly in the post-industrial revolution world, of changing your processes completely. You know it's 200 to 300 years of a behavior or pattern or systems. So you're now saying in a short time, because the truth is 5, 10, 15 years, in that spate of time is not a long time. And therefore, it causes us to have to become nimble and creative and determinate as a nation. But one of the things that I'm happy about is that Barbadians and Barbados has in its DNA the ability to pivot. That is what makes us Barbadians. Being Barbadian isn't only being about being born here at the QEH. Being Barbadian in our DNA is about being resilient. You can throw anything at a Bajan, but he's going to stand tall and rise to the occasion. Because why? History has shown us that notwithstanding the difficulties we've had to endure, that we have the ability to not only come out on top, but to lead others in our pursuit of greatness and destiny. And this debate today, and whilst others may scoff at it, as I said, try to sanitize a lost decade that brought hardship, brought a situation where people could not pay their education at University of the West Indies, financial impropriety, a whole host of things. This debate today, and Senator Cummins, I want to publicly, and let me make sure the microphone is clear in my mouth, use this opportunity to forever praise you, not just for laying the debate you built today, but for the work that you've been doing. Even when I was in Geneva, Mr. President, I used to sit from thousands of miles away and admire the temerity and work, not only within her ministry, but how she brought all these stakeholders together from across the country. The international meetings that she engaged, putting Barbados's advanced interests and offensive interests on the table. And people talk, you cannot, if you're not at the global table, you don't have a space to influence nothing. Nothing, sir. But you get my point. And Senator Cummins, we in this generation and the future owe a debt to you. And I want to make it clear that there has to be a situation where we're looking at, of course, we come into the chamber week after week, but there's certain pieces of bills and legislation that must be so about the developmental prospects and opportunities of future Barbados, but of course underscored by today, that we have to rise to the occasion in ensuring that what we say and what we do is in that interest of broad perspective, and this is one of them. But I just want to go on very briefly. In that same investment plan, it talks about transport, low-carbon vehicle expansion, passenger cars, buses, trucks, and motorcycles. I was in China about 2 weeks ago at the 4th China-Caribbean Economic Forum and Trading Forum, Mr. President. And one of the things that stood to my mind, first of all, is the advancement of the transportation sector to when I last was in China 3 years prior. And everywhere you look, the transportation system, whether it be public or private, and in particular private vehicles, mainly electric vehicles, or hybrid. Because why? They understand that as part of the new era of development for their people and the world, this is the direction that we have to move in. And Barbados' energy efficiency is not about following anybody. It is about saying, first of all, as I said, this is an imperative for our national good and development. And this is where we have to go. And I also therefore want to use this occasion to call on our young people, our persons at Polytechnic, our persons at UE, our persons in secondary school, equally our persons who are not in any informal education or may have benefited from any informal education, and here's why there has to be that buttressing of support for them. But our people must now be able to conceive ideas that can treat to creation of goods and services that are energy efficient for domestic consumption and for export around the world. And I believe strongly, and it is something that I think that we really must pursue, that in order for Barbados to be competitive even further in this area, that we must not only rely on the technology transfer and knowledge transfer in other areas from around the world, but that there must be a significant component of research and development domestically here, government, private sector, academia, which allows for ideas to contend, and then you have those ideas being able to be exported around the world. Those countries who have done it have continued to not only advance, but to be at the head of the curve. As I said at the onset, Mr. President, sir, I'm here placing this debate in the context of the future of Barbados. And I see this debate almost as a Lee Kuan Yew moment, if I should use that term. Truly. And that's why I heap such praise on Senator Cummins. Because Barbados has within its DNA the ability to turn the intellectual rigor and muscle coming out of KFIL, or our students who go to St. Augustine, or Mona, or SJPI here domestically, BCC, but equally our sixth formers. We must not believe that education and certification is only about getting a good job. I want to see the engineers coming out of school conceiving ideas that can compete and even beat their Chinese and Singaporean and Japanese counterparts on these critical issues. Who says that a Barbadian cannot conceive and produce the energy efficiency models or the technology in energy transport that comes out of South Korea? There's nothing stopping us, Mr. President. But we have to order it in a way that allows for that to happen. And today, what Senator Cummins is doing, in my view, is laying part of the big foundation, coupled with the education reform that the Ministry of Education is taking place, coupled with the knowledge creation economy that the Ministry of Economic Affairs is taking place, and missed in creating a Barbados that is globally competitive, but equally allowing for us domestically to meet our quality of life aspirations and provisions. And just to bring it home, Mr. President. I would have mentioned the countries who have advanced in this area. And you can see where they have come from within the last 20 years, 15 years. And they too went through transition. I remember stepping outside of energy, but more into the realm of water. And of course, to my immediate left is the minister with responsibility for water. But Singapore had an issue with water. And they were relying on Malaysia for their water, particularly given that it was Malaysia and Singapore, then Singapore became independent. But there was an issue that Singapore had with Malaysia, and they realized that Singapore, notwithstanding its competitiveness and GDP, they were still dependent. And it took them a bold decision. I am not even sure if this part of the world ready for that yet, but it shows you the how and the why. And what is that example I'm talking about, Mr. President? Singapore decided that in order for us to be water resilient and independent, that they're going to use all of the water and waste in their system, what we would call toilet water, whatever, backed by science, and they had 3 centrifugal processes to clean it down to its last atom and core. I'm not into the science, so I can't get the language perhaps not correct. But it took 4 years of public education to change the mind, to transition into that mode. But now today, if you go to Singapore, and I don't know how many persons in the chamber have been to Singapore, but I can guarantee you, 98% of the water that you will drink comes from that process. And it is super clean. But why? One, they saw a challenge. They saw an outcome that they needed. We have to be independent and sufficient. And 2, they realized that this transition will not be easy, but they did not cower. They did not fall to public opinion. They did not say, well, we are not going to do this. They said, you gave us a mandate to lead and to bring you to greener pastures, and we will do so. And that's the example I really want to leave on this one. This debate and this bill has gone through extensive public consultation. It has gone through significant toing and froing. But one of the legacies of this country, irrespective of administration now, has to be that we take the high road and the long-term view in the interest of not just today, but those born and those unborn and their collective good. And on that basis, Mr. President, I really, again, want to commend Senator Cummins and her ministry and her team, but equally all those in the private sector, public sector, NGOs who have lent their voice to this bill, and to really ask us as a nation to determine how do we go forward in the further building out of our independence and a new republic on these critical matters. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackman. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As I rise to close out debate on this bill, I first want to express appreciation to all, bar none, of the honorable members who have spoken and made contributions to this bill. I appreciate the robust discussion. I appreciate the inputs and the comments that have been made here today mirror the openness that we have taken to this discussion. When I opened this debate, Mr. President, I spoke about a process that started from 2019 and continued into 2020, 2022, and then 2023, leading to this process here today with all of the stakeholders. And so I can have no difficulty at all with persons today continuing to share their perspectives. Now, Mr. President, when I rose to introduce this bill, I deliberately took a position that I was going to focus on the merits of the bill, because despite what my newest colleague in the Honorable Senate has said about the similarities between the 2013 bill and this one, the 2013 ELPA contained 37 sections. This bill has 78. So on the merits alone of the size of the bill, I agree with Senator Worrell's latter comment that it is a comprehensive revision of the original 2013 bill. And that there are at least 37 additional subsections of new additions and new innovations added to the bill over and above 2013. But I welcome the inputs nonetheless, Mr. President. I want to take the time, though, to make both responses to the queries that have been raised by the colleagues and to speak on matters of policy, which I did not deliberately deal with in the front of the bill because I wanted to spend the time going through the 78 sections of the bill and taking the opportunity to go through them for the benefit of the Senate as well as for the listening public. But I will do so, I had intended to do so in my closing. Now, there were a couple of comments made on a few things. Barbados' renewable energy policy dates back to 2019. There was a previous member of the Senate who sat on that side of the table who once took credit for creating the Barbados National Energy Policy and then the Barbados Labour Party when it came to government in 2018, putting a cover on it. So I suspect that what we are implementing now has spanned at least 2 administrations and is reflective of a commitment on behalf of both the Democratic Labour Party to renewable energy and the Barbados Labour Party for executing it. So there can be no question as to why we are pursuing a Barbados National Energy Policy that is dated 2019 all the way up to now. And I am surprised that I would hear or even have questioned the possibility of why we would be going in this direction. But Mr. President, I want to potentially speak about 2 elements. Mr. President, in the November 2023, economic report of the central bank. It is public information, and I'm going to quote from it for the record, Mr. President, and I'm comfortable making it a document of this honorable chamber. Mr. President, in 2023, November, the report of the central bank, where it spoke about our import position, it covered what this government spent from 2018, 2017, 2020, 2019, 2021, 2022, and then 2023 on fuel imports. The question on its own is not just a philosophical commitment to net zero, which I don't think anyone disagrees with. The question, Mr. President, is not just a philosophical issue about should we be carbon neutral. Those are all true things, Mr. President, but the question is, how does the government prioritize its expenditure in a way that protects and looks after its people? Mr. President, the report that I'm quoting from speaks specifically to what the government spent on fuel imports. Let's start with 2018. In fuels, Mr. President, this government spent $582.2 million in fuel imports. In 2019, $579 million in fuel imports. 2020, COVID year, $431.1 million in fuel imports. In 2021, $525.7 million in fuel imports. In 2022, Mr. President, 2022, for the entire year, the government had spent close to $1 billion, $913.9 million in fuel imports. By 2023, this was a November report, the government had spent $828.6 million in fuel imports. You could imagine that if we still had a quarter to go in the financial year, by the time the financial year ended in March of 2024, the total amount spent on fuel imports in this country could have possibly exceeded $1 billion. What does $1 billion do for education? What does $1 billion do for healthcare? What does $1 billion do to support consumer welfare, as was raised by Senator Walters? What does $1 billion do to help support people? So any person, anyone who questions why there is a renewable energy transition and why a government of Barbados would want to transition away from fossil fuels in favor of renewable energy only needs to consider the opportunity costs, as I have just listed them here, for fossil fuel imports, and what we could be doing as a country with those resources. The hospital needs resources, Mr. President, but we are a small, open economy. And the government can't get all of its money from taxes because we can't overtax the population. In fact, this administration has reduced taxes to a historical low, and we have introduced measures to support those who fall under in the lowest income earning bracket to make sure that there's a reverse tax credit. So we can't tax people to be able to support our development agenda. We have introduced a large social welfare platform because we have ensured that people must matter, in particular those who are the most vulnerable. And so the government has to ensure that there are the productive sectors that help to generate the revenue, as well as the social sectors that protect people. And it has to be paid for, not in a utopian way, as if we try to take people around this notion that, oh, the government can do this, oh, we get more money from VAT. Yes, we get more money from VAT, but we had $600 million taken out of the bottom of the economy as a result of COVID year. You're still in recovery, and you still have the same expenses, if not an increased level of expenditure than you had before. When you have people walking up and down Oystons, Mr. President, after Barrel passed us, and we still have to repair the fishing harbor, Mr. President. Where does the money for those things come from? A government has to prioritize looking after people, and money therefore has to be spent that can be replaced from fossil fuel imports to support an energy transition. And I want to thank Senator Malalou for speaking in very clear terms, as did Senator Drake. She's not in her chair right now, but I want to also acknowledge their contributions. Mr. President, there's what we call a capital expenditure cost to new infrastructure. If I'm building a factory, as a matter of fact, let me say it differently. If I am buying a house, I have to go and face the bank, and I have to get a mortgage. That mortgage has to be repaid. Chances are the way the mortgage is going to be structured, I'm going to be paying interest first, and then I'm going to be paying the principal afterwards, because the bank wants to get its return. If I'm doing a commercial project, I have to rationalize what all of my capital expenditure costs are going to be. Then I'm going to rationalize how I'm going to recover that. And those people in here who are managers of large businesses, who are franchises around the globe, would understand what I'm talking about a business having to make sure that they get a return on their investment. So yes, the upfront capital expenditure costs associated with renewable energy and the transition will initially have an impact on prices. We haven't guessed at that, Mr. President. We haven't guessed at it. With the support of the UN Special Envoy for Energy, we undertook last year, and we are preparing to finalize it now, an energy transition investment plan. That's how we know, Mr. President, that this country has the largest percentage of energy consumption in the transport sector. That's how we know, Mr. President, that there are 150,000 cars to transition. But you know, Mr. President, even as we speak about the partnership between the university and the West Indies and the partnership between industry and academia, I had the privilege a year ago of launching a project which was done in partnership with the Barbados National Oil Company, the National Petroleum Corporation, Mount Gay Distilleries, and Sermes of the University of the West Indies. We launched a project called Rum and Sargassum, Mr. President. Rum and Sargassum. We drew from rum waste, and we also pulled from sargassum, which is usually on our beaches at seasonal points of the year. A year later, Mr. President, 2 weeks ago, I was able to see the outputs of that project. Barbados launched what is, and I would have to say, because I've not seen it elsewhere in the world, and I'm being chased as I speak now to come to an event next week in another country to be able to speak about this innovation that Barbados has just launched. We launched the first electric car powered by fuel generated from rum waste and sargassum in this country, the first one. That car, Mr. President, if you pass by the Division of Energy on Country Road, any day you will see it charging downstairs in the Ministry of Energy, and I want to recognize SECRI, our regional institution of CARICOM. They then allowed their car to be branded and to be used as the first test car for this process. There is a discussion underway now at a policy level as well for us to rationalize how to scale that up so that in addition to the electric cars, we also have the opportunity to look at compressed natural gas, because we took MPC down to Trinidad. MPC then went with the transport operators and the UCALs and so on to look at what it would take to be able to retrofit existing cars, because everybody can't go and face the new dealers to buy a new car. So how do we help people to retrofit existing cars and make them more resilient and sustainable? And equally so, for rum and sargassum to be able to use a biofuel created by the physicists and the engineers in our own country, with our name attached to it, with the support of the European Union and the Inter-American Development Bank, Mr. President. And we expect that under the umbrella of the Barbados National Oil Company, under my ministry, we will by next month have the first fueling station at Foursquare in St. Philip, Mr. President. Those are the innovations that are happening in this country. And why, Mr. President? Because there is, while there's a discussion around how much solar to put on the grid, and I agree 100% with Senator Drakes and Senator Worrell on the question of how quickly we transition, what do we do, how much is waiting in the queue. I believe Senator Walters raised it as well, and I don't have any difficulty. Mr. President, one, I'm proud of the innovations that the ministry has been able to see. While I am proud of the substantial work that my team has been doing and continues to do, I don't come here to beat my chest, neither do I come here to play politics with people. I don't come here for that. The reality of it, I'm not here to fool people that prices are going to go down by magic as though there's some theory out there that's going to take them down. I'm not here for that, as playing with people's emotions and creating false expectations, and I think we're better than that. Mr. President, I want to make it clear that my team, the team that I have the privilege and the honor of leading, a small team, in the Jamaican terms, I say little but Talawa, but you know what I mean. That team has undertaken what we call a multi-criteria analysis. How do we onboard solar? Because solar is inexpensive, it's easily accessible, people are very excited, and Barbadians had an oversupply because of an interest in solar very early in the game. That resulted in gridlock. The gridlock could potentially have been unlocked had we been keeping pace with regulatory oversight. So the Fair Trading Commission, it has a process that sits outside of the Ministry of Energy, and the review process, and a lot of times we hear conversations only about the narrow context of what prices are going to be and so on. But the process before the FTC interrogates a range of additional things. It interrogates a change of behavior. Things like, do we have off-peak hours and off-peak rates? Am I washing laundry and turning on my washing machine? If I wash when everybody else is washing on a Saturday morning, when people are doing errands, as opposed to 11 o'clock in the night when you have lower usage and it's off-peak, what do I attract in terms of a rate? Those are the kinds of conversations that are meaningful that we need to begin to have with this country. And my ministry is committing to continuing to have those conversations. Equally so, and I raised the point, I agree 100% with Senator Worrell on the question of looking at different types. When I talk about us onboarding solar, when I talk about oversupply of solar, Mr. President, from as far back as 2013, we were not in government. The sector tells me that the question of storage was being raised from back then. But I agreed with Senator Nichols. Sometimes everything can't be done at once, and maybe at the time it was not necessarily the conversation that you could have, so I don't fault the then government for that. But we've had since 2013 to now to come to the understanding that as long as we continue to onboard more solar, which while inexpensive upfront, is highly intermittent, highly variable, it must be accompanied by storage, which has an added cost. What is my ministry therefore doing about that? My team has begun the process, and 2 weeks ago, the cabinets of Barbados approved a project called Smarter. It is for us to be able to evolve into the development of firm baseload type projects and incentivizing those baseload type projects, because those baseload type projects would help to firm up the grid, yes, but it also reduces the constant perpetuation of solar, which would always have to be accompanied by storage, which will very much increase the cost. So we are sensitive to that. But as we talk about cost, Mr. President, let there be no doubt about it. This government engages with all of our partners on every aspect relating to this sector. But we don't need any individual Robin Hood on the outside, so-called Robin Hood on the outside there, to be able to make us think about people. That's not this government. We, with the support of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mr. President, have just completed in July, which started since last year, September. It's an impact assessment on electricity costs. It's an assessment report. The report is not yet public, so I can't quote from it, but I can assure you that the Ministry of Energy and Business has undertaken an assessment of what the impact will be on consumers of this energy transition. We've done it in the Energy Transition Investment Plan, and yes, the timelines for 2030 are highly aggressive and therefore very expensive. The timelines for 2035, we have simulated what it would look like if we were to continue with a business as usual scenario. If we were to go for 2030, what it would look like for 2035. So when Senator Drake, Mr. President, says, do we know what 2035 looks like? The answer is yes. Because we've done the modeling, we've done the sensitivity analysis, we've gotten the engineering assessments, we've looked at what the grid modernization plan allows for, and we have worked with all of the stakeholders to be able to deliver on that. Senator Walters spoke in his presentation as well about the government having a smart energy program and so on. I want to point out, for the record, that the smart energy program, smart energy fund, was launched on June 23rd, 2017. This government was not in power. We continue to implement it. It still continues to function, but it was launched in 2017. And however it was crafted at the time remains what is being done since then, with a few exceptions. And so the support for transitioning, as Senator Worrell then spoke, with regard to LED lighting and so on, that has all been done. But what we have gone further to do, Mr. President, is to assess between 2017 and 2024 what the impact has been on energy efficiency now. So what are the efficiency gains? What have been the savings as a result of the energy audits, transitioning from AC units to include inverter units, changing out to LED lights, even the street lights projects? All of the electric buses for the government of Barbados have been procured under that program. We're now doing additional procurement for other agencies as well. That is all under the Smart Energy Fund, and I am extremely confident that we will continue to evolve the fund in a way that helps to support people. Now, Mr. President, I want to clarify on the Energy Procurement Committee in this legislation for a reason. We are now engaged in a process of competitive bidding, developing a competitive bidding framework. And we had a press conference a few months ago with our international partners who were here with us, and they shared with us the development after all this time of the first battery energy storage system projects in Barbados. We've announced that we will go to market for 150 megawatts. Why have we put in 150 megawatts, Mr. President? Because we know that the Barbados Light and Power, the utility, the 15 megawatts that have been approved by them will simply stabilize the grid for what is there and those persons who are on curtailment presently. But we need to be able to get additional capacity on the grid, so we therefore need to have the accompanying storage. And we have modeled that all the way out, Mr. President, to 2026. So we know what that looks like. And between now and 2026, those base load projects, those biomass projects that I've just been describing, that smarter project, which is about developing a bioenergy economy, those things we expect to come into the mix and therefore allow for the further expansion of the grid without those highly vulnerable, variable forms of renewable energy. So those are the things that are going to be there, Mr. President, and we expect that by October next month, we will launch the first procurement. But this is what is important. The reason, Mr. President, why the Procurement Committee does not fall under the strict ambit of the existing procurement legislation is because if you consider all of the renewable energy projects across the country, Mr. President, they're all private sector owned. They're all owned by private parties. They're all owned either by the utility, they're owned by an independent power producer, they're not owned by the government. So the Electrical Committee is not procuring goods for the government. It is the facilitator of the procurement process. And this part of the legislation, Mr. President, is drawn from Jamaica's legislation. We're using the Jamaica model. Jamaica has both an Office of Utility Regulation and the Generation Procurement Entity. What we have done is we've looked at the Jamaica legislation with the assistance and the guidance of Sir David Simmons. We have created the equivalent components of what Jamaica has done to effectively ensure that the government, while not procuring goods for itself, is facilitating that entity. And it is the reason why the Chief Procurement Officer, the Fair Trading Commission, and all of those things have been incorporated in the structure. The government will not own the assets. What I can also say to Senator Worrell, through you, Mr. President, is that the transparency that has been called for is agreed. What we have done with the support of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mr. President, and Deloitte, out of Spain, has been the development of a price market analysis and a price capping mechanism, which tells us these are the prices globally for these pieces of battery, this technology, and this is how it can be procured under these prices. And anything above that, then you know is out of the scope. All of that, Mr. President, we expect to be in a position to publish, won't keep it to ourselves, to publish as part of the procurement process in October. Mr. President, we sometimes don't sleep at night. We have gone into the weeds, literally in the weeds on this. And we have ensured that from an impact assessment on what it will look like to consumers, that the government is always in a position to make decisions that will be in the best interest of the people of Barbados. Now, there was an important point that was raised by Senator Drakes about ensuring sustainability and ensuring that there's a holistic approach in terms of the design of the system. I give the commitment that all that I have just been describing is very much a part of the design work. We know that the Integrated Resource and Resilience Plan is a roadmap. That is a 3-year plan. The grid modernization plan, that is also going to take us a little bit further. We know that there's supposed to be, and I haven't shared it here, an energy storage roadmap, which is in its final stages of development, which is going to map out what we do next and in what quantum. We know what types of technology are already commercially available. Lithium ion is what we're going to the market for. But we also know that in our IRRP, we have pumped hydro, which is a possibility, which will give us a longer range of energy storage without having to go to the market for batteries. So all of that work is there in the Ministry of Energy, and I give you the assurance that that holistic approach is very much covered in our policy, which is separate and apart from the legislation which creates the regulatory framework. Now, the last thing that I want to say here, Mr. President, is specific to the tariff structure. The feed-in tariffs, there's some feed-in tariffs that were issued from as far back as 2013, 2016, and onward. And those early movers were able to get a tariff that was quite highly incentivized because they were the first movers. That usually happens. And those tariffs, Mr. President, have contributed towards the costings that Senator Drake spoke about, 2013, 2016 era tariffs. And they're for 25 years. So we're locked in to what that looks like, Mr. President, which is the reason why the FTC in June of 2023 said the next stage for a country like Barbados is to move away from the artificial setting of feed-in tariff regimes and to now introduce competitive bidding. That is why it is in the legislation, because it did not exist before. We had only the feed-in tariff regime, and that is most certainly an innovation that needed to be incorporated. But even then, Mr. President, we have respected the relevance of the Utilities Regulation Act, the Fair Trading Commission Act, and the Fair Trading Commission continues to take primacy in the identification of that process and in anchoring the procurement committee. And I want to give the assurance again that when we think about how this is all being implemented, that the government maintains at the center of its consideration how it all is going to impact the consumers. So, Mr. President, I hope, and I have tried to answer as many of the questions as I can recall or as I have taken note of. The GEED, I believe Senator Malalou spoke about whether or not the GEED is going to be able to have the necessary personnel and the support to be able to deliver on that. We have even added further, Mr. President, we have added to the electrical inspectors to create that mechanism. And so what I can say is that we are having difficulty at this point recruiting persons for these roles, simply because the remuneration scales at government, this is a generation, Mr. President, that when I joined the public service, and even when I was invited back into the public service, Mr. President, you accepted that if you're coming into the public sector for money, you're coming in the wrong place. But it's a generation now that looks for equivalence between rates of return on salaries in the private sector and what they want to earn in the public sector. And we're not always getting the skills that we need in the public sector, but we are recruiting as we speak, Mr. President. And so I want to thank, as I close, all of the colleagues for their comments. I want to give the commitment that we will continue to engage as we have done so far. This process, over the course of 2019, 2020, and all of the stakeholders that I outlined in my initial comments, has been exhaustive. And I want to thank them and take the opportunity publicly to thank every single one of the stakeholders who have submitted hundreds of comments. Hundreds of comments. And we will continue, as I mentioned before in my opening, in a regulatory sandbox to welcome their inputs as the technology and therefore the regulatory regime continues to evolve. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. The question is that this bill, the Electricity Supply Bill 2024, be read a second time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it. So, before we go to committee, we have to revert to motions related to matters of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We are required today to appoint a temporary acting chair of committees, and Deputy President, and I beg to move that Senator the Honourable Lindell Nurse be nominated as today's Deputy President.
The question is that Senator the Honourable Lindell Nurse be elected Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next ayes have it. Thank you, Senator Nurse, for agreeing to serve. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, permission to call the bill in parts.
Permission granted.
Thank you, sir. Part 1, clauses 1 through 4.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 to 4 stand part. All those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 through 8.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 through 8 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 to 8 stand part. All those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 9 through 20.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, Clauses 9 through 20 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 3, Clauses 9 to 20 stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 21 through 23.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, Clauses 21 through 23 do now stand part.
Part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, could you just go over that? Because you would have missed the audio of the first.
The question is that Part 4, Clauses 21 to 23 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 24 through 34.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, Clauses 24 through 34 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 5, Clauses 24 to 34 do stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 35 through 48.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, Clauses 35 through 48 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 6, Clauses 35 to 48 do stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 49 through 51.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, Clauses 49 through 51 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 7, Clauses 49 to 51 do stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 52 through 54.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 8, Clauses 52 through 54 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 8, Clauses 52 to 54 do stand part. Those honourable senators in favour please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 55 and 56.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, Clauses 55 and 56 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 9, Clauses 55 and 56 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 57 through 62.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 10, Clauses 57 through 62 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 10, Clauses 57 to 62 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 63 to 65.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 11, Clauses 63 to 65 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 11, Clauses 63 to 65 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 12, clause 66.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 12, Clause 66 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 12, Clause 66 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 13, clauses 67 through 79.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 13, clauses 67 through 79 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 13, clauses 67 to 79 do not stand part. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is,
Page 63. 63.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I beg to move an amendment to the first schedule, section 1, subsection 4, where it reads the chief town planner. This really should be the director of planning. I think the exact language is the director of planning and development.
the question is that the first schedule be amended to read as follows. Section 1, subsection 4.
Mr. Chairman, is ready, paragraph 1A4. The correct term is paragraph 1A4.
Paragraph 1A4 would now read as follows: the Director of Planning and Development. The question is that the first schedule be, as amended, be now the schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Electricity Supply Act of 2024. As amended.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Electricity Supply Act 2024. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, reports from, recommittal of reports from select committees.
Senator Cummins. She had it. Honourable Senators, in relation to the Committee of Selection, with the change of the administrative office of Senator Watson, it's a new appointment to be made to that vacancy arose in the Committee of Selection. The proposal is for Senator Andre Worrell to be appointed a member of the Selection Committee to fill that vacancy. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Senator Worrell, thank you. You are now a member of the Committee of Selection. Secondly, the Committee of Selection held a meeting today, and it is a report. Again, with the change of senators, a number of vacancies arose. In terms of procedure, recognize that we needed to appoint Senator Worrell first of all, but we also wanted to expedite the appointment. So we could consult with Senator Worrell. He is fully aware and supports the proposals that are made. Accordingly, those committees on which Senator Watson sat will now be Senator Worrell, with the exception of one change. That would be the Committee on Social Sector and Environment, that the membership of Senator Walters be withdrawn in favor of Senator Worrell, and that Senator Walters instead be nominated to serve on the Committee of Economic and Productive Sectors. Other than that, then, just to be clear, the nominations to fill the vacancies would find that Senator Worrell will be nominated to serve on the Management Commission of Parliament, on the Standing Orders Committee, the Committee of Privileges, the Library Committee, Public Accounts Committee. And that would pretty much constitute the proposals which form the basis of the report and the meeting of the Standing Orders Committee, as indicated, have been done in full consultation with Senator Worrell. Could I have a motion for the adoption of the report, please?
I beg to move the adoption of the report as outlined by His Honor the President.
And just to remind in terms of procedure, if the Senate gives its concurrence for the adoption of the report, that gives effect to the committee appointments, and all vacancies have been filled. I see the clerk approaching. Let me, as anyways, presiding officers freezes when clerk approaches. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The question is that the report of the selection committee be adopted. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it. The report is adopted and the committee changes have been effected. And just for procedural completeness, to let you know that the usual suitable note will be sent to the Honourable House of Assembly because the committees on social sector and environment and economic and productive sectors are joint select committees, and therefore, and so is the Management Commission. So any of the committees that are joint select committees, so the appropriate notification will be sent to the Honorable House of Assembly concerning our appointments. The question is that I do send a suitable note to the Honorable House as outlined. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. Note will be sent. That you're working hard, boy. That's his. That's yours, something. Okay, who is this? Deputy Clerk. Deputy Clerk, please. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, again, I want to express my appreciation to all the honorable senators for today, and this being the end of government business for the day, I beg to move that the Senate do be adjourned sine die.
The question is that this sitting of the Senate be adjourned sine die. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it. Before I gavel, I just want to thank everyone for their full active debate today. I know it is Friday. It is that hour at which we tend to be engaged in other activities of whatever kind. And I really want to thank you for your active engagement and productive activity this afternoon. I wish everyone a very pleasant weekend. Once again, Senator Worrell, welcome, and thank you for your participation. The Senate stands adjourned.